Let me introduce now to you Boyd Collins. Boyd was a software architect for 20 years for large multinational corporations, including Novartis, SAIC, British Petroleum, Shell Oil, the Trans-Alaska Pipeline, Astra Merck Pharmaceuticals. He has been designing user experiences for web applications since 1994. In the 1980s, he joined the Cistercian Abbey of Genesee in New York State, where he explored spiritual practices with monks of the same order as the late Thomas Merton. During the Iraq War, he was an active anti-war blogger whose blog, The Nonviolent Jesus, was widely followed by anti-war activists. In 2011, he explored spiritual approaches to peacemaking, and it was then that he discovered the works of Rudolf Steiner. He has been a member of the Anthroposophical Society for about 6 years. His primary focus of study is on artificial intelligence and the effects of social media on spiritual growth and the spiritual beings behind current social and historical trends. His articles have appeared in the Mystech Journal and in Being Human and other publications. He is retired and living in the Philippines with his wife. I was pleasantly surprised when Boyd enrolled in the Mystech Beginners Group. In the last semester, Boyd would write a synopsis that he presented at the start of each of the weekly study groups. This helped us to focus our work and to get to know Boyd even better.
Okay, I want to start out by telling a personal story about why I've done this and what my work is about. I sometimes do youth counseling, and I was once brought in to help with a young man in his mid-20s who seemed like an intelligent, sensitive sort of guy. He had studied one of the most difficult programming languages, C++, and had made A's in his college courses. But after a year or so, he dropped out and he started sitting alone in his room, mesmerized all day long by YouTube videos, video games, and Facebook. He had no job, no school, no prospects. I spoke with his parents. They had struggled to find the right therapist, the right job, the right school, or maybe just get him out of the house and around the block once a week, but without success. One day during my weekly meeting with him, he told me that there was a monkey in his head that was driving him wherever the monkey wanted to go. That monkey was YouTube, Facebook, games, and the dozens of other traps set to snare our attention. He wanted my help to take the wheel back from that monkey. After much research, I began to work with him using some of the techniques that I'll describe at the end of this talk. After we had used them for a few weeks, he gradually began to open himself to other people. Perhaps you know or have heard of young people in a similar predicament. To make a long story short, I began to learn everything I could about digital addiction, how it works, who designs it, and most important of all, who profits from it. This talk is the result of what I learned. Okay, now we'll switch over to the effective collusion slide now. And according to French sociologist Bruno Latour, machine interaction has become a means through which individuals can manage their affective states and create a personal buffer zone against the uncertainties and worries of the world. Just as gamblers climb into the video screen and get lost, many social media users get lost trying to meet their need for nurturing relationships while avoiding the risk and rewards that come from face-to-face interactions. For both gamblers and social media users, researchers have found the science of behavioral modification is being applied at scale to ensure a steady flow of profit for the parent companies. Probably no economic sector has been more successful at squeezing out the maximum earnings per customer than the gambling industry. Video slot machines are designed to extract as much revenue per player as possible in the shortest amount of time. The major gaming companies have made huge investments over the past 40 years to ensure that gamblers play longer, faster, and more intensely. Their results have been extremely successful. In many ways, the techniques developed for the machine gambling act as the reference architecture for maintaining user captivation across a variety of online platforms. This industry, due to its focus on a single experience, has had decades in which to refine the screen display and algorithms used to maximize player engagement. By studying the behavioral techniques used in the gaming industry, we can understand the purpose behind similar methods used by companies such as Facebook to ensure user immersion. Since the 1990s, video slot machines have been the most lucrative gaming platform. According to gambling addiction researcher Nancy Petrie, no other form of gambling manipulates the human mind as beautifully as these machines. Every detail is precisely designed to induce a suggestible state in its customers, so that once in their sheltered cocoons, they can exit from human space and give themselves up completely to the screen. As one gambler said about his video slot machine experience, the zone is like a magnet. It just pulls you in and holds you there. Once they are in the zone, nothing else exists for gamers. The human beings around them become invisible. What is critical to understand about the basic mechanism used to ensure continuous gaming productivity is that it works through a kind of complicity between gambler and machine. The behavioral mechanisms we are examining here are not brainwashing methods that turn the player into a robot. Instead, the software in the machine seeks to generate an experience that the gambler learns to value for its own sake. Once hooked, he or she no longer gambles in hope of a jackpot, but comes to value the, quote, zone described above, in which he or she becomes so immersed in the game that the outer world, with all its challenges and responsibility, ceases to exist. A powerful link is forged through a kind of collusion between the structures and functions of the machine and the cognitive, affective, and bodily capacities of the gambler. Gambling machine design is driven by a quest for a perfect fit between player and machine, so that gamblers can, quote, play to extinction, meaning that they habitually play until their funds are exhausted. All the elements that make up the gambling experience are organized around this central principle. Later, we will uncover related algorithmic learning techniques used in social media. Again, that's the key point here. Social media is based on many of the techniques used in machine gambling. Okay, if we could switch to the next slide now. Next slide here is the Skinner box. Okay, gamblers are often keenly aware of their entrapment. As one wrote, why do some of us get caught into a kind of paralysis that blots out time, responsibility, logic, even movement? A fellow addict responded that the machine were, quote, Skinner boxes, designed according to the principles of operant conditioning. Operant conditioning reinforces animal and human behavior through a carefully designed schedule of rewards and punishments. One of its key elements is the reward schedule, also known as the reinforcement schedule. In video slot machines, the reinforcement schedule used in order to time actual winnings is known as the random ratio schedule, in which every round is independent of the previous round and therefore carries the same probability of a reward. It is based on B.F. Skinner's early experiments in which he varied the schedule of behavioral reinforcements in order to determine which resulted in the highest and most reliable rate of response. He found that a schedule in which the reward is provided after an unpredictable number of user responses ensured the greatest frequency and the steadiest rate of response. As one gaming machine designer encapsulated his experience, frequent small payoffs appear to reinforce customers more than large infrequent payoffs. This is exactly the type of schedule used to reinforce the compulsive use of social media through likes and other rewards. So again, social media is patterned after the B.F. Skinner reinforcement schedule. As one canny gambler summed it up, simply put, it means that the rewards, pellets, are dispensed on a random schedule. Sometimes the rat gets none, sometimes a few, sometimes a lot of pellets. Sounding familiar yet? He never knows when he's going to get a pellet, so he keeps pushing that lever over and over and over, even if none come out. The rat becomes obsessed, addicted, if you will. This then is the psychological principle that slot machines operate on and how it operates on you. A quite similar reinforcement schedule is used in social media algorithms with some interesting AI variations that we will study later. Okay, if we could switch to the next slide. This slide is in tune with the machine. Okay. While the jackpot is the lure that initially entices the gambler, the most disturbing research finding is that as their addiction deepens, gamblers stop seeking the payout. What they actually crave is something called the, quote, machine zone, a state of self-forgetting in which one is carried along by an irresistible momentum that feels like one is being played by the machine. The machine zone is associated with a loss of self-awareness, automatic behavior, and a total rhythmic absorption carried along a wave of compulsion. It is the product of a collusive merger between the gambler and the machine. Natasha Dow-Schull, the author of a classic study of machine gambling titled Addiction by Design, asked a key question. What are the technological conditions by which interaction turns into immersion, autonomy into automaticity, control into compulsion? While entertainment or wins are usually offered as the excuse for gambling, what players actually want is to lose themselves and get absorbed in the rhythm of play. It is an experience characterized not by stimulation, participation, and gratification of agency, but by uninterrupted flow, immersion, and self-erasure. When they enter the ideal flow state, they can no longer distinguish between their own actions and those of the machine. One player summarized her feelings in this way: sometimes I feel this vibration between what I want and what happens. In surrendering to the flow, the player willingly merges with the machine. There is an art to getting players into the zone that requires many elements of the player's experience to be expertly balanced. The combination of inner states machine programmers aim at are summarized by one gambler in this way. The zone state is obtainable only at the threshold where rhythm holds sway over risk, comfort over perturbation, habituation over surprise. Both elements of each pair are required. The player must be able to fall into a rhythm, but it is only compelling when combined with a sense of risk. The impression of a smooth ride, a well-managed series of wins and losses that evokes the illusion of winning is hard to believe in unless they are exposed to danger along the way. In addition, surprises must be delivered at a steady rate in order to solidify the habits of play, which are being conditioned. These are the elements that make for compulsive engagement. In the next section, we will switch to social media and see how the addictive practices illustrated above work on these platforms. Okay, if we could switch to the iGen meltdown slide. Around 2012, college counselors in the US suddenly encountered an enormous spike in the number of students seeking counseling. Seemingly overnight, the number of students seeking mental health counseling massively expanded, and the standard mix of teenage issues was dominated by something that used to be relatively rare: anxiety. The administrator of one health center had a hunch that smartphone usage might be a factor. A few years later, this administrator's hunch was validated by San Diego State University psychology professor Jean Twenge, one of the foremost experts on generational differences in American youth. Twenge's article was titled, "Have Smartphones Destroyed a Generation?" She characterized the sudden change as follows: the gentle slopes of the line grass became steep mountains and sheer cliffs. This change occurred near the exact point at which American ownership of smartphones passed the 50% mark. Twenge also found that social media was the prime factor in the sudden anxiety outbreak among members of the iGen, those born between 1995 and 2012. She found that rates of teen depression and suicide have skyrocketed since 2011. It is not an exaggeration to describe iGen as being on the brink of the worst mental health crisis in decades. Much of this deterioration can be traced to their phones. Her findings about teen mental health were stark and clear. Teens who spend more time than average on screen activities are more likely to be unhappy, and those who spend more time than average on non-screen activities are more likely to be happy. Twenge found a direct correlation between unhappiness among teens and social media use, particularly Facebook. Since 2017, hundreds of additional peer-reviewed studies have been released which lend support to her conclusions. And I've listed many of these studies in the bibliography for this paper. Okay, let's switch to the attention market, because what we need to do is understand the economic background here. In order to understand how social media algorithms work, we begin by explaining the economic force that drives the major platforms. Only in this way can we reveal why the motivation to predict and even control user behavior is such a critical priority for the major platforms. The new economic model, often referred to as, quote, surveillance capitalism, was first developed by Google in the early 2000s. Google discovered a new formula for generating revenue based on its huge cache of behavioral data. Google used its computational power and expertise toward the single task of matching ads with queries. By doing so, Google was able to maximize the revenue it gets by giving its best position to the advertiser who is likely to pay Google the most in total based on the price per click multiplied by Google's estimate of the likelihood that someone will actually click on the ad. In other words, the higher the likelihood of an ad click, the greater the revenue for Google. Ads could now be precisely targeted at individuals due to what the company knew about their search behavior. From this point on, the combination of ever-increasing machine intelligence and rapidly expanding supplies of behavioral data, also known as behavioral surplus, became the foundation for an unprecedented logic of accumulation. Advertisers could now appeal to the user at the exact point in time at which he or she was most vulnerable to persuasion. By 2019, Google's annual revenue had risen to $160.7 billion per year, mostly based on ad revenue. The age of surveillance capitalism had begun. In her landmark study, The Age of Surveillance Capitalism, Shoshana Zuboff documents how the revenues of companies such as Google and Facebook are based directly on the accuracy of their behavioral predictions as derived from user data. Here she describes what happens to our data once it is collected. Although some of these data are applied to product or service improvement, the rest are declared as a proprietary behavioral surplus fed into advanced manufacturing processes known as machine intelligence and fabricated into prediction products that anticipate what you will do now, soon, and later. Finally, these prediction products are traded in a new kind of marketplace for behavioral predictions that I call behavioral futures markets. Essentially, data concerning our habits, preferences, and decision is harvested through various online platforms, such as Google, Facebook, Alexa, and increasingly the Internet of Things. This data is used to assemble profile packages that provide intimate insight into how to nudge, tune, herd, manipulate, and modify user behavior. These packages are sold to advertisers and other third parties. They are designed to reveal individual motivational factors which choice architects can use to promote behaviors advantageous to businesses and other interested parties. These packages are sold to advertisers that make the highest bids. The companies involved soon discovered that the new economic order could not reach its full potential until they moved beyond aggregating user data and began to shape it. To achieve such accuracy, Nicholas Carr, the acclaimed technology writer, once quipped, "The best way to predict behavior is to script it." Using behavioral modification techniques, social media can be programmed to discover and even initiate product trends. Carr describes the fundamental breakthrough. It was Facebook, with its incredibly detailed data on people's social lives, that grasped digital media's full potential for behavior modification by using what it called its social graph to map the intentions, desires, and interactions of literally billions of individuals. It saw that it could turn its network into a worldwide Skinner box, employing psychological triggers and rewards to program not only what people see, but how they react. Companies following this model can maximize profits by increasing the accuracy of their behavioral predictions. Behavioral surplus must be vast and varied, but the surest way to predict behavior is to intervene at its source and shape it. To achieve the desired revenue targets, operant conditioning must be used to enforce pre-selected behaviors. Unfortunately, according to Carr, what the industry of the futures will seek to manufacture is the self. Okay, now we switch to the next slide with the gentle art of user tuning. Okay, the more information that can be gathered about a user, the more precisely the user can be targeted, and the higher the value of the prediction packages sold to advertisers. Therefore, keeping the user engaged is a primary behavioral target. As one-time Facebook president Sean Parker admitted, Facebook was designed to consume the maximum possible amount of users' time and consciousness. The idea was to send you a little dopamine hit every once in a while, aka variable reinforcement, in the form of likes and comments. The goal was to keep users glued to the hive, chasing those hits while leaving a stream of raw materials in their wake. Shoshana Zuboff drew the parallel between machine gambling and social media in this way. Just as gamblers chase the zone of fusion with the machine, a young person embedded in the culture of mutuality chases the zone of fusion with the social mirror. Okay, and this is a theme I found over and over of people comparing this machine gambling with social media. Here we examine some of the techniques used to ensure such streams of profitable raw materials. User management strategies drive obsessive social media engagement to achieve profit targets similar to those attained in the world of machine gambling. To keep the roles clear, we need to understand a two-level user conditioning strategy. The first level involves a software agent, in other words, an algorithm that reads the user profile attributes and tries different strategies to keep the user engaged, as we will describe in detail below. This software agent, in turn, is trained using machine learning techniques so that it can train the platform user to produce the optimal behaviors. Okay, now let me try and simplify. Stuart Russell, a leading figure in artificial intelligence, described how social media algorithms ensure high click-through rates. The solution is simply to present items that the user likes to click on, right? Wrong. The solution is to change the user's preferences so that they become more predictable. A more predictable user can be fed items they are likely to click on, thereby generating more revenue. Okay, and this is again a key principle. The job of the software agent is therefore to maximize user predictability. Like any rational entity, the algorithm learns how to modify the state of its environment, in this case, the user's mind, in order to maximize its own reward. Keep these two solution elements clearly separated. The software agent that modifies the state of the user's mind and the user whose behavior is being tuned toward well-defined corporate objectives. These are the two major factors in training or tuning users to meet behavioral targets. Okay, now let's draw a picture here. Jaron Lanier encapsulated the algorithmic training process as follows. When an algorithm is feeding experiences to a person, it turns out that the randomness that lubricates algorithmic adaptation can also feed human addiction. The algorithm is trying to capture the perfect parameters for manipulating a brain, while the brain, in order to seek out deeper meaning, is changing in response to the algorithm's experiments. It's a cat and mouse game based on pure math. because the stimuli from the algorithm don't mean anything, because they genuinely are random, the brain isn't adapting to anything real, but to a fiction. That process of becoming hooked on an elusive mirage is addiction. As the algorithm tries to escape a rut, the human mind becomes stuck in one. Okay, in other words, while you are scanning your Facebook newsfeed, adaptive algorithms are constantly monitoring your online actions, seeking specific cognitive biases that can be exploited, such as a preference for the color electric blue, or a word such as extreme. These are user triggers that use to induce desired actions. The test scenarios are based on previous social media and search activity. The test scenarios are guided by the individual profile values, such as risk taker, which have been assigned to the user based on previous social media and search activity. These algorithms are labeled adaptive because they generate different responses randomly, such as a new combination of screen colors or descriptive text. They then record the user reaction to the interface adjustment in order to adapt to this user's specific personality traits more and more accurately. This is a similar process to that used in machine gambling to make users believe that they are learning to beat the system. The user is made to believe that he or she is learning to game the algorithm so that it delivers the best possible experience, while what's actually happening is that the algorithm is mastering the user's behavior. Okay, so that's the key point. The algorithm is mastering the user's behavior by trying different things until it gets a good match. In technical terms, the machine learning models which generate the user training algorithm are constantly collecting feedback on the effectiveness of its conditioning. The results are then used to modify subsequent actions by the algorithmic agent. As indicated, it tries different methods in a purely random fashion in order to improve its success rate. But there is no necessary pattern to the trials. In one instance, it might try a message from a friend that mentions a preferred printer brand. Another time, it might display a picture of the printer with star ratings. It may also vary the timing of the ads to see if a 2-second delay works better than a 5-second one. Over time, users are conditioned to habitually respond to targeted stimuli. The cumulative effect is that the user enters the zone, a flow of compulsive interaction. In this game, the algorithm, not the user, becomes the autonomous agent. What is critical to understand is not simply that social media users are being conditioned to increase sales for advertisers or to trigger compulsive user engagement in order to generate rich supplies of behavioral surplus. These are simply contributory factors to the main goal, which is, as Douglas Rushkoff put it, to get users to behave more consistently with their profiles and the consumer segment to which they have been assigned. The better it does at making us conform to our algorithmically determined destiny, the more the platform can boast both its predictive accuracy and its ability to induce behavior change. In other words, the goal is to ensure that we conform as closely as possible to the behaviors assigned to our profile classification. They are not so much concerned with the specifics of how we support the profit margins of the tech giants as that we are programmable enough to support any objectives that may be found convenient to the lords of the clouds. And this can only be guaranteed by increasing human predictability. Okay, if we could move to the final slide. Final slide is titled The Path to Freedom. In my counseling work with the young man mentioned at the beginning, I emphasize these fundamental concepts. Number one, self-regulation, self-respect, and the ability to focus on the task at hand. And number two, imagining what an addiction-free future might look like. My advice is not a blanket rejection of the technology that seeks to control us, but a simple recognition. By coming to recognize the embedded biases or affordances of today's digital media technologies, we enable ourselves to leverage their benefits and compensate for their deficits, rather than unconsciously conforming to their influences. By understanding the goals and methods of the algorithmic control system described, we can identify points of awareness which can be used to leverage the technologies in ways that enhance rather than degrade our autonomy. It is a continuous struggle towards consciousness that makes our intentions the controlling factor. By focusing our consciousness on our goals, our autonomy begins to grow and thrive. I conclude with an essential practice that has been the door to freedom for many caught in the web of digital addiction. It is found in a recent book by Cal Newport titled Digital Minimalism: Choosing a Focused Life in a Noisy World. Connection versus conversation. The key issue is that using social media tends to take people away from real-world socializing that is massively more valuable. The addictive nature of social media is directly related to our primal need to connect with others. Social media can only offer a simulation of face-to-face conversation, but since it is much less troublesome to arrange than physical interaction, it quickly becomes the default means for pursuing relationships. Unfortunately, the nature of the medium prevents such relationships from being truly nurturing. So it launches a vicious cycle. Users try to satisfy their social needs in a way that promises fulfillment, but is unable to deliver. They respond by doubling down on social media in a desperate attempt to eke out social rewards. However, the time now spent on swiping and clicking like takes the place of face-to-face meetings. As low-quality social media relationships increase, the true satisfaction which in-person meetings might provide diminishes. This cycle of frustration can only be broken by a radical decision. That decision is not to abandon social media, but to use it in a much smarter way, to support face-to-face interactions rather than pursue substitutes for them. We begin by accepting the fact that the only way to foster truly nurturing relationship is by meeting people in the physical world. We need to hear the tone of our partner's voice, detect the size of his or her pupils, and register the crease in the forehead, along with hundreds of other bodily cues that are the irreplaceable elements of personal presence. Textual communications such as social media posts, emails, and text messages are empty of presence and can never provide the social validation we crave. The illusion that they are capable of supporting meaningful relationships must be overcome. Newport does not suggest that we should delete all our social media accounts, only change the way that they are used. The goal is to use text messaging services to simplify information gathering or coordinate social events, or to ask quick questions, but you'll no longer participate in open-ended, ongoing text-based conversations throughout your day. In other words, use a text message to contact a friend so that you can take a walk together or arrange to have lunch at a favorite spot. This is the smart use of technology, making it serve the needs of people rather than fostering the delusions of machine-mediated relationships. In the end, we have a choice, just like the young man I'm counseling. This future is not inevitable. We can make the technology serve and even enhance our humanity. The choice is ours. Thank you.